WNST All-Star Game. I tell you what, I'm out on LinkedIn, and I follow this guy on LinkedIn, and he's been a frequent contributor around here. It feels like he's on once a year or every thereabouts doing a book. He's written 100 books, so that makes him at least 100 years old, and I know that that's not true at all because I've got his wiki out here, but the new book is on Coach Wooden, and when I saw that Pat Williams, the longtime VP of the Orlando Magic, and a guy that knows a little bit about Philadelphia parades even before the Eagles won a few weeks ago. We welcome Pat on from sunny Orlando, Florida, where he still reigns there as the Orlando Magic in a tough season, but any Coach Wooden wisdom that makes its way to my doorstep is music to my ears, and the new book is Coach Wooden's Forgotten Teams, Stories and Lessons from John Wooden's Summer Basketball Camps. Pat Williams, I know you weren't a summer kid out there with Coach Wooden, but we can all take some lessons, my man. How are you?
Nestor, I'm doing well. Sure nice to catch up with you. And this is the fourth book that I've written on John Wooden. I don't think you can really ever properly mine the depths of this man, generally considered the greatest coach in the history of American sports. But there was so much more to him, so much to learn from him. And this latest book that we've done examines him through the lens of his summer camps that he ran for many, many years, touched thousands of young people. And I was just curious to really dig in and see what we could learn about Coach Wooden through his summer camps.
Well, you know, the summer camps came along, and I made it to Mackey a couple of years ago out in Purdue, and boy, there's a whole legacy there before the Wizard of Westwood and all that stuff. And I share John Wooden's birthday. So 1 year, very late in his life, when I was syndicated 20 years ago, my producer hooked that up, that on our mutual birthdays, we did 20 minutes of radio. I haven't listened to it in 17, 18 years ago that it was. But, you know, having every conversation with every Bill Walton, every person who ever touched him is magical to me. What's your Wooden story? When was the first time that you touched him, met him, talked to him, experienced time? I mean, I listened to these old tapes of him with Tony Robbins and stuff, and I just always find it magical because those lessons really do apply to what you would want to teach your 3 or 4 or 5-year-old child, sports or non-sports, about things that matter in life, about sticking to things and having the integrity to follow through on those things. It's never too early to learn those things, and when you're teaching a kid in summer camp, I'm sure 60, 70 years later, it still applies, right?
Well, Nestor, at heart, John Wooden was a teacher. Yes, he was the most successful coach that basketball's ever seen, but at heart, he loved to teach. He was an English teacher, really, at heart. And what we learned is that through those summer camps, he was very much a part of it. He didn't just trade off on his name. He was there every day. He set the pace. Things were done the way he wanted them done.
I'm sure there was a written curriculum of every activity, right?
Oh yes, and he met every day with the teachers, the assistant coaches who were running the program, and things were done exactly the way he wanted it. And the number of lives that those camps touched is just amazing. Now, obviously, we didn't get to everybody. There were thousands of kids, but we tracked down a bunch of them to get their memories.
Wow.
We tracked down many of those assistant coaches who worked under him, you know, during those summers, and everybody else that we thought would have an interesting story about their time, you know, in the summertime. And the end result is this: he coached those summer camps exactly as he would his UCLA teams. That's what I learned. He was on top of every detail. So those children who, gosh, at the time, I guess they were, I don't know, 12, 13, 12, something like that. They got a taste of John Wooden exactly as the UCLA stars would have. And as we talked to some of them, their memories are so vivid from those summer camps, the impact that it had on their lives, and many of them now, you know, are grandfathers, but they still remember vividly exactly what happened and the impact that John Wooden had on their lives when they were just kids. It's a beautiful story, and a part of Coach Wooden's life that really never has been properly examined. So hopefully this book will be an inspiration to many, including coaches from all over in different sports. I think people will really enjoy getting a different aspect in studying the life of John Wooden.
Well, where did it come to you? I mean, you wanted to be a baseball player, as I remember it, and I would think at that point in your life when you were an athlete yourself, he was about to do magical things. Going a decade without losing a game at UCLA. It was on everyone's radar, no matter what sport you were involved in, what UCLA was all about. But then you moved to the basketball side, and then that's where the legend is built, right on his end.
Well, I guess my first real conscious awareness of John Wooden would have been during my days at Wake Forest. I spent 4 years there. This was during the Billy Packer, Lenny Chappell, Bones McKinney era. And in 1962, our Wake Forest team got to the Final Four and beat UCLA in the consolation game. That was the last loss for John Wooden's Bruins for a long, long time in the tournament. So I think that was probably the first time that, I really paid attention to John Wooden. But as the years went on, and he began to provide those legendary results, oh my goodness, 7 straight titles, 10 in 12 years, 88-game winning streak. I mean, just amazing things. But he did it with such class, such dignity, and the impact that he had on all of his players and every life that he touched. That's really the beautiful thing. So, Nestor, this is the 4th book I've written about Coach Wooden. The first one came out a few years ago. It was called How to Be Like Coach Wooden. And then the second book was called Coach Wooden, The 7 Principles that shaped his life and will change yours.
I own that one, by the way, with Tony Dungy involved in that one. I remember that one.
And then the one a little while back was called Coach Wooden's Greatest Secret. And then this one is called Coach Wooden's Forgotten Teams. The question that's being asked, well, have you mined the depth of everything there is on John Wooden? I don't think you'll ever possibly do that. But for now, anyway, I'm moving on to different topics. I think we've done John Wooden about the best we can do him, Nestor.
You know what? I got the Seth Davis book on my nightstand, and I've been fingering through that, and that is just a thick tomb of information and stories. I love the 7 principles because I think that's a little bit more activated for a guy like me that's just trying to get to it and say what's the big picture on this. It's interesting too. I just wanted to throw this at you because my wife and I were having a conversation, and my wife's now a 2-time leukemia survivor, and I know cancer's touched your life in so many ways, and you and I have discussed that in the past. But Jerry Kramer getting into the Hall of Fame, and you talk about going to these 70-something-year-old men who were students of John Wooden when they were a boy in a summer camp, 12 years old in the 50s or 60s, whenever that was. But Jerry Kramer would sit with me every year and just tell these incredible Lombardi stories as only a guy who was in a very exclusive group of 50, 60 gentlemen that used to sit in these meetings and, quote-unquote, go to war in the Ice Bowl and whatnot on behalf of Vince Lombardi. But you've also, culled some of that stuff. I would say this to you, to Pat, there's nothing like sitting with someone. If I want to hear about Dr. J or about a young Charles Barkley, I got to sit with you, right? It's got to be from the inside of that to hear those stories. And even then, it's only passed along second generation. Unless you have that playbook and you have that curriculum, this is the best you're going to do 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And in all the books I write, have written, I try and dig in and reach those people who knew somebody. We did a book a year or so ago called Vince Lombardi on Leadership, and I was very fortunate to track down so many of the old Packers who knew Vince Lombardi, played for him, and we got their take on him. It was wonderful. And as you mentioned, Jerry Kramer, I'm thrilled about, it's long overdue that he goes into the Hall of Fame. He was he was a Hall of Famer by sure.
How do you feel about all these Hall of Famers all these years later? I mean, I know you're a positivity guy, and but at some point there's a line of what is and what isn't. Boy, it's really become blurred through all these Hall of Fames. I mean, it's I'm a guy Aparicio on the back of my jersey here, so obviously I have a stake in the claim in Cooperstown. But we really have it. We haven't gotten better at it, I don't think, right? Over the course of time.
Well, Nelson, there's no definitive way to say he or he is not a Hall of Famer, but I think if you've stood the test of time and if your record holds up after all these years, I think that's a pretty good shot. I don't know why it took Jerry Kramer so long. All of his other teammates from Green Bay are in who deserve it, and so Jerry Kramer deserves it. I of all the players who went in with that vote, I was most happy for Jerry Kramer, who has filled the notebook of many, many writers about the great Vince Lombardi. There's no question about it.
Pat Williams is our guest, of course, the executive VP and longtime one of the leaders of the Orlando Magic, aptly titled. And the new book is on John Wooden. You can find that Amazon, anywhere books are sold and all that stuff. And I guess last thing for you, being a son of the fighting city of Philadelphia and the city of brotherly love, Pat Williams, Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champs. How does that sound to you? I mean, as I said in the beginning, you know a little something about parades up in Philadelphia. You had one back in the day.
Well, we won the NBA title in '83, Nelson, and still brings back wonderful memories from that period. The city has hung through so many football ups and downs that I was thrilled for every fan up that way and around the world, really. They played extremely well. It was a beautiful story. So many human interest stories. And the city will be celebrating that one, Nelson, for a long, long time. And deservedly so. It was one of the most memorable Super Bowls that I can come up with. And, let's put it this way. I've got a Philadelphia Eagles hat. I'm wearing it around proudly on top of my white hair, Nelson.
Hey, I appreciate the time, as always. The book is out. It's on Amazon. Coach Wooden's Forgotten Teams, Stories and Lessons from John Wooden's Summer Basketball Camps. Appreciate you making time. Thanks for coming on with us.
All the best, Nelson. Thanks a million.
There you go. He's Pat Williams with Jim Denny, forward by Nan Wooden, Stories and Lessons from John Wooden's Summer Basketball Camps. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world that you happen to be. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.